Welcome back to another episode of Second Career Pilot. We're diving into something super important for every pilot, especially you guys who are newer to aviation. We're talking about aeronautical decision making, or you'll usually hear it called ADM.
ADM, you can kind of think of it like your pilot's sixth sense almost. A way to think systematically, make the best choices. Because flying, presents this really unique environment.
Yeah, for sure. Like how you think through all the information coming at you and then choose the safest way to do things. And we're going right to the source for this one, Chapter 2 of the FAA's Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge.
Yeah, the handbook, so this is grounded in some solid established principles, not just someone's opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The main thing we want to do today is give you practical tips to fly safer and feel more confident every time you're up there. And we'll keep it straightforward. No need to get lost in the jargon.
Right, we're aiming for those aha moments, the ones that really make things click. So let's jump right in. Let's start with how crucial ADM really is. Might be surprising, but even with all the advances in planes and training, accidents still happen.
Yeah, that's the reality, unfortunately.
And a big part of that, the human factor, as they call it, plays a role in like 80% of accidents.
80%? Wow. That's a huge number.
It is, and it really highlights why how we think and make decisions in the cockpit matters so much. You might think most accidents happen during some crazy emergency up in the air, but...
Yeah, like you're losing an engine or something.
Right, exactly. But actually, most general aviation accidents, the highest percentages happen during landing. Like a full 24.1% happen on landing.
Really? I wouldn't guess that.
Yep. And takeoff comes in close at 23.4%. So what does this tell us?
I guess that ADM isn't just for emergencies. It's for, like, everyday flying.
Exactly. It's a system for assessing risk and managing stress, not just in those extreme situations, but in every phase of flight. It's about understanding how your own attitudes affect your decisions when you're up there.
So it's not just about knowing the rules, but, like, applying good judgment, right?
Absolutely. And here's the good news. Good judgment, it's not something you're born with. It's something you can learn and get better at.
Okay, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
So where do we even start with building these ADM skills?
Yeah,
The FAA Handbook lays out some steps for good decision-making.
it does. There are 6 main steps. Identifying those personal attitudes that could be hazardous. It all starts with honest self-reflection about how you tend to think.
Okay, that's the first step. What comes next?
Learning how to actually modify your behavior. Once you know a risky attitude, you can work on changing how you respond to things.
Makes sense. Like recognizing your own patterns and breaking the bad ones.
Yeah. Exactly. And then the third step is all about stress, how to recognize when you're stressed and how to cope with it. Because, stress can seriously mess with your ability to think clearly.
Oh yeah, stress can cloud anyone's judgment. So what are those last 3 steps?
Well, step 4 is developing those risk assessment skills. So that's identifying potential hazards, anything that could go wrong, and figuring out how risky they are.
Okay, yeah, like weighing the potential problems.
Yeah.
What about number 5?
Using all the resources you've got. That means checklists, your aircraft manual, air traffic control, anything that can help you make a good decision.
Don't be shy to ask for help. What's the final step?
It's about always evaluating how well your ADM skills are working. It's ongoing, you're always learning and improving.
Right, makes sense. So you mentioned risk assessment as a key part of ADM. Let's break that down a bit more. What does understanding and managing risk really mean in the context of flying?
Well, risk management, think of it as being proactive, identifying those potential hazards ahead of time. It's like thinking, okay, what could go wrong, and then figuring out how to reduce the risk before it even happens.
So being ahead of the curve, planning for the what-ifs.
Exactly. And when you use good decision making, you significantly lower the risks that come with flying. Sometimes you can even eliminate them entirely.
So you're in control as much as possible. And the FAA has some key principles for risk management, right?
They do, yeah. 4 of them. First one, accept no unnecessary risk. Flying, obviously, has inherent risks, but unnecessary ones. You don't want to take those,
Yeah.
especially if there's no benefit.
Okay, makes sense. Like what would be an example of that unnecessary risk?
Say you're flying a brand new type of aircraft for the first time.
Yeah, a plane you've never flown before.
Choosing to do that in, say, really low visibility, that's unnecessary risk. You're still learning the ropes with the new plane. Why add that extra challenge on top of it?
Yeah, that's a good example. What's the second principle?
Second one, make risk decisions at the right level. And in general aviation, that level is you. You're the PIC, the pilot in command. You never let anyone else, not even ATC or your passengers, dictate the risk level for your flight.
Right, that emphasizes the responsibility that comes with being a pilot. What's the third principle?
Third principle, only accept risk when the benefits are greater than the dangers or costs. Every flight has some risk, but you got to weigh that against the benefit.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Like familiarizing yourself with that new aircraft, great, but do it on a day with clear skies and calm winds, not when the weather's iffy. The benefit's the same, but the risk is way higher in bad weather.
Got it. So choose your battles, basically. What's that final principle?
Last one. Integrate risk management into planning at all levels.
No.
Risk is part of every single flight, so you got to use those risk management strategies, not just before you take off, but during all phases of the flight. It's a mindset.
Okay, so it's a continuous process, not just something you check off a list before you go. Now, there's some important terminology around risk that can be confusing, especially when you're starting out. We hear the words hazard and risk used a lot. What's the difference?
Yeah, that's a good one to clear up. A hazard, think of it as a condition, event, or circumstance that you, as a pilot, might encounter. Anything that could cause harm, basically. Like a thunderstorm in your flight path, that's a hazard.
Okay, so that's the thing itself.
Right. And then there's risk. Risk is your assessment of how bad that hazard could be based on your experience, your plane, the specifics of the hazard. So the risk associated with that thunderstorm is higher if you're in a small plane trying to fly through it, lower if you've got radar and can easily go around it.
So hazard is the thing, and risk is your judgment about how bad it could be for you specifically. It makes sense. The handbook uses this example with a nick in a propeller.
Yeah, it's a good illustration. Imagine you're doing your pre-flight check and find a little nick in the propeller blade. The nick is the hazard.
The potential problem.
Exactly. The risk is your assessment. What are the chances that nick could lead to a propeller failure if you start the engine? A seasoned pilot might look at that nick and say, low risk, because they know that type of minor damage probably won't cause a catastrophic failure.
Right, they have the experience to back up that judgment.
Exactly. But a less experienced pilot, they see the same nick and think, high risk, gotta cancel the flight.
Yeah, better safe than sorry.
And neither decision is necessarily wrong. It just shows how different experience levels affect how we assess risk.
That's a great example, especially for us newer pilots. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The handbook talks about these hazardous attitudes that can lead to bad decisions when we're flying. Definitely something we all need to be aware of.
Totally. Aviation psychologists, they've identified 5 common ones. First one is anti-authority. You know, that don't tell me what to do attitude.
Oh yeah, some people really hate rules.
Right. They resent those regulations, see them as inconvenient, don't think they apply to them.
So how do we counter that?
The antidote for anti-authority: follow the rules. They're there for a reason, usually learn the hard way.
Okay, rules are our friends. What's the next hazardous attitude?
Impulsivity. That do it quickly attitude. It's that urge to act immediately without really thinking it through. Like you see a gap in traffic and just go for it, no hesitation.
We've all felt that, haven't we? Like, gotta seize the moment.
Yeah, but in aviation, that can be dangerous. So the antidote here is not so fast. Think first.
Take a beat. Consider the consequences. What's number 3?
Invulnerability. The it won't happen to me mindset. It's this belief that accidents only happen to other people, not to you.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a problem. Like you get complacent.
Exactly. And it's dangerous because in aviation, things can change in an instant. So the antidote for invulnerability is remembering it could happen to me. Taking chances is foolish.
Right. Stay humble. Acknowledge that you're not invincible. What's the 4th one?
Macho. The I can do it attitude. It's that need to prove yourself, sometimes by taking unnecessary risks.
Oh, I've seen that one. It's like they want to show off.
Right. They push the limits just to impress people or prove something to themselves. So the antidote for macho is similar to invulnerability. Taking risks is foolish.
Step back, make the safer choice, even if it doesn't feel as cool. What's the last hazardous attitude?
Resignation. The what's the use mindset. It's that feeling of helplessness. Like you can't change the outcome, so why bother trying?
Yeah, giving up before you even start.
Exactly. Like the weather's getting bad, nothing I can do, might as well just keep going. And that's really dangerous. So the antidote is, I'm not helpless. I can make a difference. You always have choices.
Right, even if it's just turning around or landing somewhere else. Okay, so being aware of those hazardous attitudes is huge. But what about some more practical tools? The handbook talks about some ways to formally assess risk. What are some of those?
One that's really helpful, especially when you're starting out, is the risk matrix. It's a visual way to see risk levels based on 2 things. How likely is it to happen, and how bad would it be if it did?
Okay, so likelihood and severity.
Exactly. Likelihood, it's on a scale from improbable to probable. And then severity, it goes from negligible to catastrophic. You plot those two things on a matrix, and it shows you if you're in a low, medium, or high risk area.
So you get a visual representation of the danger level.
Exactly. And that can really help you decide, do I fly as planned? Do I need to change things? Or is it just too risky to go at all?
That's a great tool. Are there more complex programs for those who want to get really detailed?
Oh yeah, definitely. While that basic matrix is a great starting point, there are more comprehensive risk assessment programs. These can be tailored to your specific flying, factoring in your health, fatigue, weather, aircraft capabilities, and your overall preparedness.
It's like a personalized risk assessment.
Exactly. And some of these programs use numerical scores for different elements, and then your total score falls within a range that tells you how cautious you should be or what you should do.
Sounds pretty high tech.
It can be. You might find these offered through flying clubs or pilot associations.
Good to know. Now, we've talked about assessing external risks, but what about assessing ourselves? I mean, making sure we're fit to fly. The FAA has a checklist for that, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's called the IMSA-FIFI checklist, and it's essential for every single flight. It's a quick check, but it can really help you catch potential problems before they become serious.
So what does IMSAFE stand for?
IMSA-FI. Illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and emotion. Before you even get near the plane, you go through each of these. Honestly assess yourself.
Like a self-check-in?
Exactly. Are you feeling sick, taking any meds that could affect you, stressed out, had any alcohol recently, tired, feeling overly excited or anxious?
If any of those are a yes, it's a red flag, right?
Huge red flag. It means you might not be in the best shape to fly, and you should really consider postponing or canceling.
Better safe than sorry. So IMSAs is for checking on ourselves, but what about the plane and the environment? There's a checklist for that too, right?
Yep, the PAVE checklist. It's a way to assess the risks associated with the plane, the environment, and even external pressures.
Okay, break that down for us. What does PAVE stand for?
So PAVE, pilot in command, that's you and how you're doing based on that IMSAFE check. A for aircraft. Is it the right plane for this flight? Are you familiar with it? Is it properly equipped and airworthy?
Making sure the plane's up to the task.
Right. Then V for environment, weather, terrain, airport conditions, airspace, anything to do with what's around you.
Okay, so that's all the external factors, and what's the E?
E is for external pressures, things that might be pushing you to complete the flight even if it's not the safest choice. Like feeling obligated to reach your destination on time, not wanting to disappoint passengers, things like that.
Ah, those external pressures. They can be really tough, especially for new pilots.
They can. It's easy to feel pressured to get somewhere or not let people down. But managing those external pressures, that's one of the most important parts of risk management.
Because if you let those pressures get to you, you might ignore other risks, right?
Yeah, exactly. Think about it. Having someone waiting for you at the destination, or that get-home-itis, that strong desire to get back home, it can make you push on even when it's not safe.
Yeah, I can see that happening. So how do we manage those pressures?
One of the best ways, have some personal standard operating procedures, or SOPs. These are guidelines you set for yourself to reduce those pressures.
Okay, like what kind of guidelines?
Things like giving yourself way more time than you think you need, so if there are delays or weather diversions, you're not stressed. Have backup plans and be willing to use them. Make backup reservations if you absolutely have to be somewhere at a specific time. And talk to your passengers.
Explain to them that safety comes first.
Exactly. Let them know that arrival times might change, that delays can happen. Even if it's just a local flight, having a little overnight kit in your bag can take off that pressure to get back home the same day, no matter what.
Those are some really helpful tips. So it's all about planning ahead, having those buffers and backup plans in place. Now, we've talked about pre-flight planning, but decision-making happens throughout the flight. The handbook has this model for continuous decision-making, the 3P model, right?
Yeah, it's a simple model, but really effective. Perceive, process, perform the 3Ps.
Okay, walk us through those.
So perceive is about constantly scanning for hazards, using that PAVE checklist, just being aware of what's happening inside and outside the cockpit.
Stay vigilant, basically. What's process?
Process is where you evaluate those hazards you've perceived. Think care, consequences, alternatives, reality, external factors. What could happen if this hazard turns into a problem? What other options do I have? What's really going on right now? And how are external pressures affecting my thinking?
So you're analyzing the situation.
Right. And then there's perform. That's where you take action using the team checklist. Transfer, eliminate, accept, mitigate.
Okay, break those down for us.
Transfer the risk maybe to ATC by requesting a different altitude. Eliminate it if possible, like turning back. Accept the risk, but only if it's minimal and you have a plan. Or mitigate it, meaning you take steps to reduce the impact.
So the 3P model, it's not a one-time thing. It's something you do throughout the flight.
Exactly. It's a loop, perceive, process, perform, constantly adapting to what's happening.
Now, for those of us flying single pilot, managing all the resources and making all the decisions can be a bit overwhelming sometimes. The handbook mentions the 5 Ps check for single pilot resource management, SRM.
Oh yeah, the 5 Ps are a lifesaver for single pilot operations.
So what are they?
The plan, the plane, the pilot, the passengers, and the programming.
Programming.
Yeah, that refers to the programming of your avionics. At key points during your flight pre-flight, before takeoff every hour, or at your midpoint, before you start descending, and before final approach, you review these 5 things.
To make sure everything's still good.
Exactly. Each P has its own set of challenges and opportunities that can affect the risk level of your flight.
Okay, so you're checking in on everything regularly.
Right, and by doing this, you can catch potential problems early and make good decisions before they become big problems.
Now, what about unexpected problems in flight? The handbook talks about the DECIDE model for dealing with those.
The DECIDE model is great for those unexpected situations. It's a 6-step process to help you work through the problem logically.
Okay, tell us about those steps.
First, detect the problem, recognize that something's wrong. Second, estimate how urgent it is to react. Third, choose your desired outcome. What are you trying to achieve? Fourth, identify possible actions. What are your options? Fifth, do the action actually implement your solution? And finally, evaluate, did it work, or do you need to try something else?
It's a way to approach the problem step by step.
Right, very analytical. But the handbook also points out this other way of making decisions. They call it automatic or naturalistic decision making. That's what more experienced pilots often do in really time-critical situations. They rely on their experience and recognize patterns to quickly choose a solution without having to go through each step of the DECIDE model.
So DECIDE is more for us newer pilots who are still learning.
Yeah, exactly. It helps to have that structure.
Now, we've mentioned using external resources like ATC, but what about resources inside the cockpit?
Using all your resources, both internal and external, is super important for good ADM. Internal resources, well, that's your skills, your knowledge, the checklist, the POH, even your passenger.
Passengers can be a resource.
They can, believe it or not. Verbal communication is huge, even if you're flying solo. Read those checklists out loud, physically point and touch the controls. It reinforces what you're doing and helps prevent errors.
Yeah, those little things can make a difference.
If you have passengers, they can help with things like spotting traffic, reading checklists, just having another set of eyes and ears. Just make sure to brief them before the flight on how they can help you.
That's good to know. What about external resources? We've talked about ATC. What else is there?
Air traffic control and flight service stations, or FSS, those are your go-to external resources. ATC can give you traffic advisories, help you if you're lost, provide assistance in emergencies. Don't hesitate to call them if you need anything.
They're there to help.
Exactly. And then FSS, they offer weather briefings, en-route weather updates. They can help you if you get disoriented. Really valuable resources.
Okay, so lots of help available. Now, one of the most important things for safe flying is maintaining situational awareness. What does that mean for us as pilots?
Situational awareness is about having a clear and accurate picture of what's happening both inside and outside the cockpit.
Like where you are, what the weather's doing, all of that.
Right. It's about having the big picture, not getting tunnel vision on one instrument or task. Things that can mess with your situational awareness are fatigue, stress, high workload, distractions, and also getting fixated on one problem and ignoring everything else.
Yeah, that can be dangerous. And managing your workload effectively helps you maintain that awareness, right?
Absolutely. Workload management is all about planning, prioritizing, and sequencing tasks so you don't get overwhelmed. As you get more experience, you'll get better at anticipating those high workload periods, like takeoffs and landings, and preparing for them during the less busy times.
Okay, so be prepared.
And know when you're starting to feel overloaded. If you're working harder but getting less done, that's a sign to stop, breathe, prioritize, slow down, and maybe delegate some tasks if you can.
Take a moment to regroup.
Right. If you have a passenger, maybe they can monitor instruments or watch for traffic. If you're flying solo, you can always ask ATC for help. Maybe hold in a less busy area while you get things sorted.
That makes sense. Now, what about flying those more advanced planes with all the fancy avionics and automation? Anything specific we should keep in mind there?
Automation is great. It can really improve safety and reduce workload, but you can't become too reliant on it. If you do, you might lose those basic manual flying skills.
Got to keep practicing the fundamentals.
Exactly. Make sure you understand how the automated systems work, keep practicing manual flying, and know when to use automation and when not to. Strong information management, automation management, and risk management are all essential skills when you're flying with advanced avionics.
It's like a whole new set of skills to learn.
It is, yeah. And always double check your programming inputs. Be ready to verify anything you enter into the computer. Remember, the automation is there to help you, not replace you.
Got it. Well, this has been a really insightful look at aeronautical decision making. Clearly, it's a continuous process, and mastering these skills is crucial for us as pilots.
It's about thinking proactively, assessing risks, and making good choices based on all the information you have. And the goal isn't to eliminate risk entirely, but to manage it so we can enjoy flying safely.
So as you're thinking about this, think about those hazardous attitudes we talked about. Which ones do you think you might be more prone to? How do you assess risk before a flight? What are those external pressures that might influence your decisions?
Before your next flight, take another look at those IMSAFE and PHAK checklists, even if it's a familiar route. And try applying the 3P model, perceive, process, perform throughout the flight. Make it a habit.
And we'd love to hear from you guys. What are your questions about decision making? What scenarios do you find the most challenging? Your feedback helps us create better content for everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. Hopefully this gives you some tools to stay safe up there.
Thanks for listening.